Welcome to the Politicrat. I am Omar Moore. It is Saturday, August the 22nd, 2020.
Are they catching on at all?
No. Don't look that
What
way.
do you think? Are they catching on?
No.
They're
Who's
vicious. They're spending a tremendous amount on negative ads on me.
No. You know what I thought was the kind of wow moment was the guy you brought up on stage.
Yeah, that was good.
We played it several times this morning.
We played it up against
They're
Obama.
both guys. They're both guys.
guys.
Oh, it is. We played Obama first.
The young guy
and
with
then we
the
played
champ.
the guys.
I saw it. I watched your show this morning. You have me almost as a legendary figure. I like.
No, I tell you, this morning, what we basically said today was we were completely wrong about the
Totally.
debate. Yeah.
I thought.
I thought I did really well in the debate show. I have to tell you.
I didn't. Yes, Alex?
3 viewer questions.
You did not, right?
Oh my God, I was like, he's melting down. I think his head's going to explode. I thought your head was going to explode.
We were wrong.
I did.
You thought what?
Your
were
head was
wrong.
going to
Oh
explode.
no!
Yeah.
I thought I did.
Oh, yeah.
My daughter was
Don't forget
screaming
they
at the
come-
TV.
By the way, he told me, he goes, I was having fun.
Oh my God.
What do we have? One more segment?
One more segment, and then we're good. Thank you for doing this.
Okay. I'm doing it because I
said,
get nothing.
this
You know,
is good.
you get great ratings and a raise. Me, I get nothing.
We're getting a real window into your. So.
Well,
Just make us all look good. That's it.
exactly.
So how come Drudge and Time Magazine said I won the debate show, and you think?
Well, but so did the CBS Bowl. The next morning when I saw the CBS Bowl,
Well,
I
they
knew.
second, but they
yeah, but still, I knew that the people that mattered didn't think you lost it. I mean, you came in a strong second, and I'll tell you what was the most revealing thing is Bush came in last.
Yeah, he came in last.
The guy you
He's
fought
weak.
came in last.
He's a weak person.
And at that point, I said to Mika, we don't know what
He's a weak
going to
person.
happen. Said so.
He's a weak person.
Okay.
You don't want me to do the ones with deportation?
We really have to go to some
and paper the
questions.
wall?
That's right. Nothing too hard, Mika.
Okay.
That was a clip. Well, it was a clip, all right. Mika Brzezinski and Joe Scarborough in February of 2016 in a hot mic moment with Donald Trump, who was then the candidate running for president. A hot mic that revealed some very chummy banter between the three of them. But this episode will focus on the interesting dynamic in the change of relationship and the dynamic of the relationship between Mika Brzezinski and Joe Scarborough and Donald Trump, and how that relationship has changed so dramatically over the last few years. Welcome back. I have to say I'm in a little bit of a quandary in terms of how to frame this show that I'm doing, this particular episode. And you may be able to hear the wind howling in the background as I just try to crystallize the focus here. The media has long had a relationship with Donald Trump. And for context, I just want to introduce this before I get to the focus. And Donald Trump has had a long relationship with the media. Since the early 1980s, he had appeared in all manner of television for and on news channels and TV networks and for interviews. He had been on page 6, the infamous page 6 of the New York Post. He was constantly getting headlines in the New York City media. And he was somebody who had been known as a, if not lovable figure, certainly a figure who everybody had heard of in New York City in particular. he was nicknamed the Donald. Somebody in the media, I don't know who, or maybe someone outside the media, came up with that nickname for him. And there was this glorification and lionization of him. He was always a self-promoter, and that fit perfectly with the media, who were hungry to boost ratings and have somebody to cover and have stories to report on. And so the tabloid press, particularly in New York City in the 1980s, were all over Donald Trump. This was before Donald Trump and his father had been doing a lot of illegal things in New York and racist things in New York, such as denying black people the access to rent from their properties in New York. That had been well documented. In the 1970s, the federal government brought a suit against Donald Trump and his father, and they won. And Donald Trump and his father, on at least 2 different occasions, had to pay out money for their racist discrimination, discriminating against black renters. But that didn't matter to the media. They continued to cover him. And while most of the news about Donald Trump's racism was limited to the print pages at that time, that took a slight turn in the 1980s when he put out the racist ad in a number of newspapers castigating the 5 young boys who had been swept up in a park called Central Park. And you know that park. It's a park known all around the world. Central Park was the place where, in 1989, a young white woman who was jogging was savagely and brutally attacked. But it was not by these 5 boys who were black and Latino. It was by one man who was a Latino man who later confessed. These 5 boys spent years and years in prison, some of them 16 years in prison, for a crime they did not commit. And even after DNA matches to one person, this older man, had shown that only one person committed the crime and these 5 boys did not, Donald Trump was standing by his racist ad that he paid something on the order of 86,000 American dollars for, calling in that ad for the death penalty against these young boys. Not only that, when the news came out that not only was it not these boys and the DNA cleared them, but that the DNA only matched one person who confessed himself to doing the crime by himself, Donald Trump refused to apologize and refused to back down from his ad or his racism in that ad. The media continued to report on him. They continued to champion him. He ended up getting a television show with NBC. He had a contract with NBC for a beauty pageant. He sometimes appeared on that pageant. He infamously barged into the changing rooms that the women who were a part of that pageant, including Miss Teen USA, were dressing in. The media continued to cover him. When the NBC network gave him the contract for The Apprentice, NBC Universal, he continued to be showcased in the media. The Access Hollywood tape, also from NBC, showed Donald Trump, of course, saying the misogynist things he said about women. And that tape had been lying around for many years. And it was only in 2016, just about 3 weeks or so, or maybe a month or so before the election, that the news about that tape was released. The tape finally was released. And it was released literally a day or two before the debate over that weekend. I believe it was a Friday in October or so. And on that same Friday in October or September, whenever it was in 2016, came the WikiLeaks dump. And we know that that was connected to the Russian hacking of the DNC server, including John Podesta, the chairperson of the Hillary Clinton campaign. His email was hacked. But the point is that the media just kept reporting on Donald Trump as if to champion him. The corporate news media, according to CBS Market Watch, provided up to $5 billion of free advertising for Donald Trump, free airtime. One of the very networks that gave him that airtime was none other than, guess who? NBC. Their network, MSNBC, part of the NBC group of networks, in 2015, gave Donald Trump a whopping 36 minutes of airtime, virtually uninterrupted, 33 minutes of which were uninterrupted. The first 2 or 3 minutes were interrupted when Donald Trump continued to talk as Joe Scarborough on Morning Joe was trying to ask him questions. You will hear that audio during this episode, at least the part of the audio where Joe Scarborough cuts off Donald Trump and goes to commercial break. But this ties now into not only the statement that Les Moonves would make during the very same month of February, or at least rather the month of February in which Mika Brzezinski and Joe Scarborough and Donald Trump were on a hot mic saying all the things they said that showed this very cozy relationship in between commercial breaks for what was supposed to be an interview with tough questions being asked. And there were some tough questions being asked by Joe and Mika. But the point is that this is the same month, February of 2016, where Les Moonves, then the CEO of CBS, said this to a group of investors during a conference call in San Francisco. This is what he said.
Man, who would have expected the ride we're all having right now? This is pretty amazing, and, who would have thought that this circus would come to town? But, it may not be good for America, but it's damn good for CBS. That's all I got to say. The money's rolling in, and it's amazing. That's all I can say. I've never seen anything like this, and, this is going to be a very good year for us.
And therein lies the rub. It may not be good for America, but it's damn good for CBS. And you can extrapolate that further. It may not be good for America, but it's damn good for the corporate news media. And that goes, of course, beyond CBS. It goes to NBC, it goes to CNN, it goes to CBS, it goes ABC, Fox. And Donald Trump has been a cash cow for all of these networks over these last 5 years. If you're dating back to June of 2015, when Donald Trump first announced his candidacy for president, In fact, he announced it on June the 16th, 2015, the very next day. A white racist man, who's all 21 years old, murdered 9 black parishioners at the Mother Emanuel AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina. But the point of this is looking at this relationship. And I just wanted to provide that background because this relationship was a real problem. Mika and Joe, who would later get married, they have been married now for, I think, just over 3 years. And they continue to do Morning Joe together. But there are some things I'm going to be playing that show you this kind of relationship that they had with Donald Trump. Now, as I said earlier, they have known, or at least Joe Scarborough, maybe Mika as well, have known Donald Trump for well over 10 years now. And there was a time, like I said, where their relationship was very cozy. And then it soured sometime in around 2016. And then the following year, the two of them penned an op-ed piece in the Washington Post entitled "Donald Trump is Not Well." It was a op-ed piece that responded to some of the lies that Donald Trump tweeted out about Mika Brzezinski, and also some of the scurrilous things they did to Joe Scarborough as well, spying on him, threatening him, all kinds of things. Then there was more a few months later, and then more another year later. And then in 2019, both Mika and Joe were on the air absolutely castigating Donald Trump about his finances when the New York Times story came out about the fact that Donald Trump didn't pay taxes and some other things, and you'll hear that clip as well. And then, of course, this year, in 2020, was the really disgusting story that Donald Trump completely made up out of whole cloth about Joe Scarborough, which was not true. And I'm not even going to repeat the story. But I think people who have long enough memories in this year, as chaotic and as crazy and as traumatic as this year has been so far, people among us will remember the things that Donald Trump this year was accusing Joe Scarborough of. And you can go and look that up. I'm not going to republish the kind of scurrilous things and the lies of Donald Trump. They are very poisonous and very dangerous. So there has been this relationship between Mika and Joe with Donald Trump. And the thing that's interesting is that there are reports of the two of them staying overnight at one of Donald Trump's properties. In 2016, after Donald Trump had stolen the election with the help of the Russians and the Republicans, Mika Brzezinski, late into that month of November of 2016, was at Trump Tower for a meeting, she said. Corey Lewandowski, who was part of Donald Trump's campaign, was also, strangely enough, or interestingly enough, also in that lobby, joining Mika. They both went into the elevator, one after the other. And I'm assuming that they both were going to the same destination. So there is this very interesting relationship, to say the least, between the three of them, Mika Brzezinski, Joe Scarborough, and Donald Trump. Not to mention all the other people who appeared on Morning Joe regularly who had had a relationship with Donald Trump in some way, shape, or form. Mark Halperin was a good buddy of Donald Trump's, and we know about Mark Halperin, who would be on Morning Joe to give his take about things. And this is a guy, Mark Halperin, who harassed women, who assaulted women physically, who, masturbated in front of them and did all kinds of really odious things and disgusting things in the workplace to women. And he was sitting there on Morning Joe, went on Trump's boat, went on his jet, did all this kind of stuff. There's photos of Halperin with Trump. I mean, it's just, this goes really deep. And it's really not just about Mika and Joe and that kind of fluctuation in a relationship. It's really also about the media overall, which I guess is the main thrust of this whole thing that I'm trying to do here with this episode. And how sleazy some of the very same people are. Sleazy like Donald Trump is. Maybe not as dangerous as Donald Trump, but sleazy like Donald Trump. I mean, if you look at NBC alone, Chris Matthews, a sexist and someone accused of sexual harassment against women at the workplace. There was a story that came out this particular calendar year. And Laura Bassett, who I believe writes for Vanity Fair or writes for a high-profile publication, and Laura Bassett's on Twitter, and she wrote about how Chris Matthews was very inappropriate with her in so many different ways. His language, what he would say to her, very sexually suggestive and harassing kinds of things that he would say to Laura Bassett. And there were, I guess, other reports and allegations and things. And that was really, I think, at the heart of Chris Matthews being let go, being fired by MSNBC back in February of this year. February or March of this year. He was canned. And long overdue. Chris Matthews has had a long history on MSNBC, another NBC network, of sexist things, of racist things, but particularly sexist and misogynist things. He had reputedly called Hillary Clinton the B word on the air, not to her face, but still, it doesn't matter. And if you go on YouTube, unless they doctored the clip, you can hear him saying these things. Now, I don't know if that clip is doctored or not. But if it is doctored, even if it is, Chris Matthews has had a long history, on and off camera, of saying things about women that are very derogatory and sexist. No different from Donald Trump, who has had a long history of the very same. Donald Trump, on an interview on Morning Joe, I believe it was in 2016 during the New Hampshire primary, has said that he admired Chris Matthews. And Chris Matthews was right there. Donald Trump was on the phone talking to them, as he customarily did on Morning Joe. They always invited him on. Mika and Joe invited him on all the time. He always called in pretty much on a daily or weekly basis during 2015 and certainly into 2016 before things began to sour. But Morning Joe had him on almost every day in some instances. So when I say that he got free airtime, $5 billion worth of it, I mean that. So the NBC networks gave him so much airtime, among others. And some of the people on those networks who were broadcasting, and not just on NBC. I talked about Les Moonves, who himself, again, if I didn't mention, I'll say it now, a serial harasser and violator of women, according to the great reporting of Ronan Farrow, who detailed this in stark and disturbing detail in one of the stories he wrote for New Yorker magazine. these people who cover Donald Trump, or who at least are heads of the organizations in which he's covered, are the same kind of people that Donald Trump is. And if they're not rich, and many of them are rich, and Donald Trump's not really a rich human being, he's a scumbag, and he has less money than he lets on. But these people fit the same profile as him, which make them problematic too. And certainly it influences their coverage of him. Many of them know him. Many of them are friends of his. And I think a lot of this, quite frankly, is much a joke. The pantomime villain, Donald Trump, pantomimes the media as a villain, yet he has such deep ties with the media. And he says these things about the enemy and all of this nonsense about the media, and yet Donald Trump has deep ties with them. He watches them every day. He watches all of them every day, even still now. And he's always begging for people to write good things about him. He would call into the media and pretend to be someone else, John Barron. And let me tell you about Donald Trump. And I can tell you as John Barron that Donald Trump is a good... He would make up pseudonyms and then call media outlets and give interviews as John Barron. John is Donald Trump's middle name. Barron is the name of his son. Now, this was done before his son Barron was born, but the point I'm making is that this guy, apart from having a screw or two loose, and certainly has, not to totally belittle it, but has some very serious mental issues, which is what the Donald Trump is not well piece in the Washington Post was about, as written by Joe and Mika in 2017 or thereabouts. Crystallizes how sick this man is and how dangerous he is, and how deep his ties are with the media, and the manipulation of the media, and the manipulation of his so-called supporters and fans and cult members, which makes him extremely dangerous still. He and the media, I know you can't see this, were like this. And in some ways they still are. Despite the way he behaves in the White House press briefing room. It's all a show. The way he castigates these reporters. Now, it doesn't mean that show is pleasant. It doesn't mean that show is harmless. It's very harmful. And when he attacks reporters who are female, it's disgusting and it's very dangerous, and it is something that should not be permitted. It should be absolutely rooted out. And the media should stop carrying his press conferences. But there are people in the media who just behave the same way he does. Racist, misogynist, harassers, rapists. Look at Matt Lauer. Matt Lauer was part of NBC and NBC News. He got to interview Donald Trump and he got to interview Hillary Clinton in 2016. Matt Lauer would lock the door of his office by pressing a button that was underneath his desk, so that when the woman he wanted or tried to rape would come into his office for an after-work meeting, he would lock the door behind them remotely with this button that he'd press underneath his desk. And then he would expose himself to these women, or then he would ask these women to have sex with him. And then he would try to kiss them. All of this is documented in many a story. And I believe that Ronan Farrow who himself used to be at NBC through MSNBC, had a show on there at one point, wrote about this himself. Certainly others did. And that's the creepy thing. Andrew Lack had to step down from NBC and MSNBC. He was accused of sexual harassment, as was a deputy of his. They both had to leave, if they haven't already left. I think they have. And Lack was running NBC News, or at least MSNBC. He was running it. And under his watch, it became far more Republican leaning. And still is. But those two had issues with, or are accused of, harassing women, being sexist, doing very disgusting and inappropriate things, and things that would be crimes, and are crimes. So this is a serious thing. This runs really deep. It runs really deep. I've only just scratched the surface about all of these sleaze bucket people in the media who are covering Donald Trump, and yet they do exactly the same thing in their lives. In fact, their public lives, never mind their personal. I mean, on the job, they're harassing women. Charlie Rose doing it. That was the end of his career. Some of these folks knew, and yet they're covering a guy who has been credibly accused of rape many times, several times. Certainly, his first wife, Ivana, accused him. Certainly, we know E. Jean Carroll has been fighting in the court to get Donald Trump to give a DNA sample. Her lawyers have been on that for quite some time. And she wrote a whole article about it in New York Magazine in 2019. Could have been 2018, but I think it was probably 2019 in which she wrote this article in New York Magazine where she really went through the very graphic detail. And then Donald Trump's response to that and what he said. When I come back, I'm going to play some audio clips. Maybe in this commercial break, you can take a shower after listening to what I've just had to say to you.
Rally on the USS Yorktown in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until our country's representatives can figure out what the hell is going on. You have no choice. You're going to have more World Trade Centers. It's going to get worse and worse, folks. Yes, we have to look at mosques, and we have to respect mosques. But yes, we have to look at mosques. We have no choice. We have to see what's happening. Because something is happening in there. Man, there's anger.
So his plan, as he announced that he was actually reading his statement there about what the plan is to not let Muslims in for, again, what he says is a period of time, whatever that means. He got a standing ovation inside the hall at that rally on the ship, but did cause a lot of backlash from critics, also Republicans running against him, who now almost universally have come out against this idea. Donald Trump called into my other job, the other show, Morning Joe, earlier this morning. My co-host, Joe Scarborough, tried to get specifics about this new proposal, and Donald Trump was defiant.
You should be afraid of the other side, not my side. Well, I want to get our hands around a very difficult situation.
All right, Donald.
Hey, Joe,
You got to let us ask questions. You can't just talk. No, you got to let us actually ask questions. You're just talking. All Muslims. Donald, you're not going to keep talking. We will go to break if you keep talking. We're going to ask you questions. All right, go to break. Go to break, everybody. Go to break. Go to break right now. We'll be right back with more Morning Joe.
So what scares me is that our sort of shock, and for me, this is, for the first time, I'm sort of nervous about what I'm watching, to be very honest. I think he actually had really broad appeal, and I mentioned a week ago or so that I thought he was squandering that for the general, that he really had kind of a momentum, whether you agreed with it or not. Still does. And what scares me about this is that he is a pretty brilliant man and knows how to tap into what people are feeling and saying. And there is a vacuum. There is an opening for this, created not just by the Obama administration, but by the George W. Bush administration. I mean, the events of the past decade have really made this country ripe for these feelings, and he's tapping into them.
But George W. Bush, as well as Dick Cheney, and this is the statement that we just showed,
I'm talking about our foreign policy.
aggressively spoke out against this type of rhetoric.
That's great, but if you want to go into why this vacuum exists, it's everything that's been happening in terms of foreign policy, endless wars, and now a continued problem in Syria, and ISIS hitting here at home. I mean, this is all not just popping up out of nowhere.
No, it's
this
not.
has happened over the past two, administrations, and caused by some serious foreign policy blunders.
Serious foreign policy blunders by George W. Bush and Barack Obama, but that still grants no excuse for this type of language.
Absolutely.
I do think, though, and Alex just told me, if you're actually scoring at home constitutional scholars, and I know we have a lot of constitutional scholars, the Morning Joe Constitutional Scholar team that we have. It's a huge demo.
It's basically Willie.
That was audio from 2015, of course, the day after the racist Muslim ban proposal Donald Trump had announced as part of his presidential run, December 7th, 2015, there had been a terror attack here in California, in Southern California, actually. And so Donald Trump used that to further his own racism and his bigotry and anti-Islamophobia, his Islamophobia, I should say, and to cheering throngs of white people, which I think is much worse, them cheering it, even than him saying it, as bad as that is as well. But I think Mika got something wrong in that clip. This racist backlash is not because of foreign policy. I firmly disagree with that. And it's not because two presidents, George W., who is a war criminal, and Barack Obama, suddenly botched foreign policy, and there was Iraq, and there was water torture and waterboarding. This is about the whole country. This is about 500 years, 244 years. This is about the country not looking at itself in the mirror and not addressing the problems it sees in the mirror. That's what it is, Mika. It's not, the foreign policy, and that's why people... And like Eugene Robinson, and Joe Scarborough himself rightly said, it doesn't excuse the language, even if there was something about those wars and the torture and whatever. It doesn't excuse the racism and the language and Donald Trump doing what he's doing. This goes back, Mika, a whole lot further than two presidents. This is the DNA of the country that Donald Trump is tapping into. And one of the reasons why he was successful, beyond the stealing of the election, with the help of the Russians and the Republicans who were stealing it for him as well, is that he also tapped into the misogyny of the country and the racism of it, which is why you had these people voting for him, these white people voting for him. 63% of white men and 51%, or was it 53%, of white women voting for him, mostly in the suburbs. These people are also racist. It's not like, we want to change. Yeah, you want to change and you're willing to vote for a racist because you are one yourself. I don't buy this, economic anxiety. You can have economic anxiety and you're still racist. That one has nothing to do with the other. You know that the guy's racist. You know he's a misogynist. He said all these racist and misogynist things over the better part of 2 years, and he'd been saying them for 50 years. 50. Simple research would have revealed that. He discriminates against black people in housing. This isn't some economic anxiety. You voted for a racist and you knew it. You knew it. And he hasn't let you down since. Welcome back. What I remain fascinated by is this relationship that Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski have with Donald Trump. Perhaps it's somewhat dysfunctional. But what is known at this moment, at least, is that there certainly is a relationship there that's now beyond repair. I guess it was 2017 or so when the National Enquirer had threatened Joe Scarborough. I mean, this was just the most bizarre thing. And this was David Pecker and these kinds of individuals who were running the company behind or that owned the National Enquirer. And I forget the name of Pecker's company. I think it was American Media International or American Media Enterprises or whatever the organization was. And that organization had purchased the National Enquirer. There is a documentary film called Scandalous that goes into this in the gorier details that I am not going to spend time on here. And the point I'm making is that David Pecker, behind the stories here, was doing something called catch and kill, meaning capture the individual who is the subject of the story, either threaten them or offer them money or offer them a chance to name a price in order to prevent them from going forward with a story on Donald Trump in particular. And if they agreed not to go forward with a damaging story on Donald Trump, they therefore would then stop threatening the individual and then supposedly pay them money. But as I think that documentary reveals, there are people who didn't get any money. They signed an agreement but didn't get any money at all. It was a complete ripoff, but they could not disclose anything because they had signed the document without legal advice, apparently. But the point is that they signed something and they were scammed. Joe Scarborough, for whatever reason, I don't even remember what it was now. But all I know is, and all I remember is that at the time, and Joe Scarborough had to come on the air and talk about it, and I'll play a little bit of that as well. Joe Scarborough had actually said that the folks around Donald Trump had been called. This is while Donald Trump was in office in the White House. And people associated with him were calling from the White House directly to Joe Scarborough and saying, look, the National Enquirer is going to go ahead with a story on you. And if you don't want that story to go forward, then you're going to have to do this or that. And Joe Scarborough, I'll let him explain it a whole lot better since it is his story. And at the time they were threatening. I mean, people in the White House were threatening the children of Mika Brzezinski. I mean, this is really evil stuff. Really evil stuff. So you're going to hear a series of clips, and I may interject in some of them. I've had to kind of truncate some of these because, the infamous one, really the 36-minute interview that was interrupted, I'm going to play you one or two clips from that, but really the interruption is the main clip. And then you're going to hear some other clips that I may or may not interject into. But this is just unbelievable. But this also comes, again, in a contextual setting. Because the audio of the hot mic, which, by the way, was procured by Harry Shearer, so I thank him, the comedian and, I guess, political observer Harry Shearer, I thank him very much for the audio, which is where I obtained it, and I thank him for making that available, and I do appreciate it. And I mean, this is just, it's unreal, and this comes in the vacuum, in the backdrop of what many think, including Soledad O'Brien. Now, Soledad O'Brien said this on Twitter, and she's been in the news business for a long time herself. And this is really the reason, she's the reason I'm doing this episode of this particular episode, because ordinarily I would stay away from this kind of thing. But I do think it's important because of the way that in our society, news and celebrity have completely merged. Or I should say, news and tabloid have completely merged. And I have said this before on this podcast, is that the news today is essentially, specifically, tabloid stories. And the whole way that in the corporate news media, at least, many of the reporters and anchors go about asking questions have a very kind of gotcha feel to them, a very kind of tabloid feel to them. And so it's within that spirit that I think I'm presenting this particular episode, because otherwise, I honestly really wouldn't waste much time on this. But I think there is a cautionary tale here. Not just because there was some audio that was a hot mic, this hot mic audio. That's really not the cautionary tale. It's the danger of covering someone like Donald Trump and really not questioning him with the kind of scrutiny that you should, although I must set the record clear here. You will hear perhaps some audio here, and I will say this, whether you hear this audio or not, but Joe Scarborough was one of the few people, particularly, certainly on Morning Talk on cable, who did and who has questioned Donald Trump fairly intensively. Now, what passes for intensively these days was a walk in the park, was minimum from people like Mike Wallace back in the day, who interviewed Donald Trump and, made it very clear that Donald Trump was not going to get away with the BS he gets away with now with a lot of reporters who I think now are afraid of him. Just like many of these Republican politicians, they're absolutely scared crapless of Donald Trump, which is a very dangerous thing when you have people in the media who may be afraid. Now, there's a lot of people in the media who are not afraid of him. The Paula Reeds of the world, the Yamishas of the world, the Weijia Zhangs of the world, the Peter Alexanders of the world, the Jonathan Carls and the Jonathan Swans of the world, the Caitlin Collinses of the world. They're not afraid of him. They will ask him things. The SV Dates of the world. You say, are you ashamed of, do you regret the many lies you've told to the American people? I mean, people like SV Date, they're not afraid of Donald Trump. So there are a number, the April Ryans of the world, they're not afraid of Donald Trump. But there are people in the media who are afraid, and some people in the media companies who are afraid. There are people in political circles who are afraid. We found that out 6 months ago, didn't we? So much so that the Democratic Senator Sherrod Brown actually took to the New York Times op-ed page to talk about how afraid Republican senators were at the time of the impeachment trial, the sham trial that Mitch McConnell brought, of course, where there were no witnesses testifying, no witnesses allowed. Who does that? What kind of trial is that where you have no witnesses heard from? And yet they acquitted him, these Republican senators, and it was done out of fear. Sherrod Brown wrote that New York Times article, and I'll get the exact date of that article for you shortly, in which he talked about how the Republicans came up to him and said, yeah, he did it, he's guilty, but, I'm afraid, I don't want to face the heat. And now it turns out that you're going to face the heat this November, because these Republican senators are all going to be voted out, pretty much all of them. Because when you really look at it, they have aided and abetted him as much as the corporate news media have. And when I want to go back to this with Joe and Mika, because while they have at times given the questions and has certainly questioned Donald Trump, particularly in 2015 and into 2016, these guys are also seen by many as people who actually have enabled Donald Trump's rise and were responsible for putting him in the White House. Soledad O'Brien yesterday had tweeted out something to that effect, and I agree with her. I definitely think that Joe and Mika, with their cozy relationship at the time, even with a couple of the early ups and downs in 2015 and 16, they definitely were responsible in part for aiding Donald into the White House. I mean, they did. And there's a really good article about this too in the HuffPost, HuffPost.com. The title of the article is Joe and Mika Owe America an Apology. This article was written July the 1st, 2017. Very interesting stuff. Very interesting stuff. And there is a vindictiveness about Donald Trump and a petty-mindedness about Donald Trump. And what was interesting is that in 2015 and 16, in 2015, when Donald Trump had this racist Muslim ban, it certainly got Mika Brzezinski's attention. And that was in December of 2015. The following day, which is December the 8th, the day after that ban, Mika Brzezinski expressed a lot of she was really scared, and she was brutally honest about that. On the air, she said that. And so these are the kinds of things that I think got her to be very concerned. But even with all of that, this article in the HuffPost, written by Peter Dreyer, his last name is spelled Dreier. He is listed as the professor of politics and the chair of the Urban and Environmental Policy Department at Occidental College. And in the article, Joe and Mika Owe America an Apology, the subtitle is Let's Not Forget that the Morning Joe co-hosts, particularly Scarborough, are partly responsible for Trump becoming president. I would totally agree with that, by the way. Now, I would hazard a guess that Joe and Mika would vehemently disagree. And when it came to accusations of them being very cozy with Donald Trump in 2015 and into 16, they made the unusual step of going on the air to vehemently take issue with that. It sounded like they doth protest too much. You have to read that article, Joe and Mika Owe America an Apology. It's quite interesting and fascinating. And it probably crystallizes this whole thing better than I might be able to do here, to be quite pointed about it. But I do recommend you read that. There was a New Year's Eve party that apparently they attended, Joe and Mika, or at least one of them did. The article goes on to say at one point that Joe Scarborough bragged about how he and Mika had known and been friends with Donald Trump for a decade, end quote, praising him as, quote, the master of many things, end quote. And by the way, you may be able to hear in one or two of these clips the praise that they say. It's just interesting. This is another reason I bring this up, and again, I thank Soledad O'Brien for I read her tweet, as I said, on Friday when she tweeted it, and I said, I tweeted back to her and said, thank you, that's a really good idea. Because she said somebody should do a show on all of the times that Mika and Joe enabled Donald Trump and helped him to put him in the White House. And it's so true. I mean, I felt that way about them. They certainly did, as did I. They weren't the only ones, but they certainly had a pretty darn high-profile platform. But this is a feud that played out on the air. This is a feud between the two of them who've known him for over a decade. That played out publicly through Twitter, through the show. And I think the other part of this is the stuff that's not being addressed here is the damage it does to the notion of journalism. To have this kind of thing spill out like this. You've got a guy who is a traitor to the country, who is in the White House. He happened to also be a friend of theirs. That friendship sours. He does things that are, quite frankly, illegal, tantamount to extortion or whitemail, as I would call it, with we're going to run this piece on you, Joe Scarborough, in the National Enquirer, so you better do this, that, and the other. You better call the White House. You'll hear the audio that Joe Scarborough, you'll hear him talk about all of this. But I think the thing that's not, and I guess this article talks about it a bit, but the thing that's really not being hit upon here or grasped is the damage that the institution of journalism suffers. I mean, it's this immense damage where you have really opinion hosts covering things as if they are journalists, having discussions about the news, reporting the news, but yet are really editorializing. And that's what really the corporate news media is now and has been for, roughly 20 years, if not a bit longer. It's all editorialized. Very rarely now do you find anything on the corporate cable news where people are just reading the straight news to you. And there are some exceptions. But all of these hosts now, whether it's Anderson Cooper or Rachel Maddow or Lawrence O'Donnell or Chris Hayes or whomever, when they do their shows, they're not doing straight news. They are doing news, yes, but they are also opinionating. They are also weighing in personally with their opinions. In addition to Joe, and I don't think that that's great at all. What's really interesting is that the companion piece to this Joe and Mika owe America an apology is actually the Washington Post editorial that Joe and Mika write roughly a year or so after this particular, or maybe the same year. I don't even know if it's 2017 or 18. I always get mixed up, but I'll get that information. You have to read the op-ed that the two of them wrote called Donald Trump is Not Well in the Washington Post. And in that, they say that Donald Trump has lied. That's not a surprise because he lies all the time. And they go into a lot of the detail about his mental state. And in this Joe and Mika owe America an apology, the writer Peter Dreyer calls them liars. I don't know. And he's talking about the guy we knew 2 years ago is not the same guy in the White House. And Peter Dreyer calls that a lie. Right? And the thing that I don't understand is that Joe and Mika have known him for 12 years, at least a decade, at least 10 years. And they are shocked about Donald Trump. I don't know Donald Trump personally, but I've known about him for the better part of 40 years, 40 years. And he's been this same person all along. A vile and racist and misogynist human being who is all about himself and says the most outrageously racist and misogynistic and sexist things. He had comments on Larry King Live in the 90s. He had comments on Larry King Live in the 80s, talking about these 5 young boys in Central Park, the exonerated 5 as we now know them. Talking about, well, if I was a black, I'd rather be a black, not black person, not African American, not, black American. I'd rather be a black. I think the blacks. And that's Donald Trump in the 1980s talking. This guy discriminated against black people in his rental properties in New York. He and his dad, like a father and son team, a tandem. And they had to pay money to the, in a settlement with the federal agencies to end that discrimination. I mean, and Joe and Mika did not know about him. Are you kidding? This is not the guy that we knew 2 years ago. And he's had a penchant. He said outrageous things. And look, you can talk mental illness or not, and it's a very serious subject. But I'm sorry, then he's had this for years then. And mental illness or not, it doesn't excuse, I'm not saying that people are excusing it, but it does not, I'm just saying this for the record, it doesn't excuse any of this. It really doesn't. So that's why people out there, and I'm inclined to put myself among them, given the clips that I've watched of them, Joe and Mika, in 2015 and 16. I'm inclined to say that, yeah, they did help Donald Trump get into the White House. But it wasn't just them, it was the whole media. It was all the corporate news media, as I've told you. $5 billion of free airtime. Free airtime. And that's really the whole thing. They all gave Donald Trump a free ride, a camera on his empty podium, while Bernie Sanders in 2015 and 16 was getting many more people at his rallies, and Hillary Clinton getting a fair share at hers. Neither of them were being covered as often as Donald Trump was. And they would have the split screen and the larger box be the empty Trump podium with his text information on it and his name on it. And in the smaller box, the picture-in-picture box, you'd have either Bernie or Hillary at their rallies. Actually, at their rallies. with crowds that are huge. That was going on in 2015 and 16. The media are all guilty of this enabling, and to some extent they still do it. Particularly when every story they tie or report on ties into Trump somehow, and that they don't independently report these stories without it connecting to Trump or without them connecting back to Trump. It's the whole P.T. Barnum adage. There's no such thing as bad publicity. Just make sure you spell my name right.
In 1991, though, NBC Nightly News did this review of Donald Trump's problematic financial position. Take a look.
When you borrow as much money as Donald Trump did, nearly $2 billion, and the economy goes into a tailspin and you can't pay the interest on your loans, the bankers move in, and they have. Here's what's in the works. Donald's $100 million yacht goes to the Boston Safe Deposit and Trust Company. His half interest in the Grand Hyatt Hotel goes to Bankers Trust. His interest in Alexander's department store goes to Citicorp. His Trump shuttle goes to Northwest Airlines. What Donald Trump gets is a chance to start over. He probably won't have to declare bankruptcy. On the boardwalk in Atlantic City, he keeps his casinos. In New York, he keeps the Plaza Hotel, which he hopes to convert into condominiums. He keeps the old Pennsylvania Railroad yards. He wants to turn them into a real estate development. What he doesn't keep is Ivana. She divorced him and got $14 million. If Donald wasn't so badly in hock, she might have gotten $2.5 billion. Donald is trying to put a good face on all this. I wasn't free to wheel and deal during my divorce, he says. Now I'm able to do what I do best. In Atlantic City. But a lot of people think Donald has had his day, that his game of Monopoly is almost over. The man who was the darling of the 80s is seen in the 90s as a man in trouble, and he knows it. I'm being put up there, says Donald, with Gorbachev and the Kurds.
Wow, that look back is particularly interesting this morning as the New York Times is pulling back the curtain on President Trump's finances. The paper says it has obtained tax information on Trump from
ice is, by the way, very thin. Photograph. Very thin ice, but go ahead. Dracula on thin ice.
From 1985 to 1994. And says the documents show that by the time his best-selling memoir, The Art of the Deal, hit stores in 1987, Trump was already in deep financial trouble. Deep. Losing tens of millions of dollars on bad business deals. The paper says the figures show that in 1985, Trump reported losses of just over $46 million from his core businesses, mostly casinos, hotels, and retail space in apartment buildings. Those businesses continued to lose money every year for a total loss of $1.7 billion over the nearly 10-year span. The Times goes on to say that year after year, Trump appears to have lost more money than nearly any other individual American taxpayer, citing his results compared to information compiled by the IRS on high-income earners.
Wait a second, Mika. Are you saying
he's
that
the biggest loser?
All the people who file taxes in the United States of America over this decade, that Donald Trump lost more money than every other American? I mean, that's like back then, that's like 250 million people.
Than anyone.
Well, he is special because, I mean, 1 out of 250 million.
He won that one.
Wow.
In 1990 and 91, his core business losses totaled more than $250 million.
Well, I'm sure a lot of other people were losing then.
more than twice that of the nearest taxpayer in the IRS's information for those 2 years.
So he lost twice as much as the biggest loser underneath
as anyone.
Twice as much.
The paper adds that Trump lost so much money.
I can't put a good.
He was able to avoid paying income taxes for 8 of the 10 years they examined.
So he doesn't pay income taxes.
Well, that's one way to get around taxes.
So, wait. This is also confusing because
I thought he was so successful.
I read The Art of the Deal, and I wanted to get into real estate. As you all know, I'm really good with money and investments. Yeah, that's why Willie and I go to the dog track every day.
Handle the checkbook.
We play the dogs. We play the puppies.
Long on the puppies. Yeah.
Long on the puppies. So what's so interesting is, and why this actually is news. Republicans go,
case closed.
Case closed. This doesn't mean anything. It actually does, because Willie, that NBC report from 1991, the belief was then that Donald Trump was flying high in the 80s and then crashed when the economy went down, and in 1991 things went terribly wrong for him. What this New York Times report shows us was that it was always a scam. He was always losing money, even in the years leading up to The Art of the Deal. He had lost hundreds of millions of dollars. And while he was losing money, his father was making money. In fact, his father's only losses were investments in his son, and he had already given his son the equivalent in 2019 dollars of like $415 million to get him started. He lost all of that money. He lost all of the $415 million and more.
Well, this is the second chapter in a story that began by the same group of reporters at the New York Times in October when they wrote the piece about Fred Trump, Donald Trump's father, who actually gave Donald Trump all the money that he squandered over the years. This is the next chapter in a story that, again, does more than poke a hole. It completely deflates the entire narrative around Donald Trump, which is that he made himself into this magnate in New York City. He got a TV, wrote books about how to become a magnate.
So rich.
He got a TV show that was based upon the fact that he was great at business and he could teach you how to be great at business, and he was tough and he fired people. And eventually it made him so famous, in part, that it put him into the White House.
But think about it again. Before Art of the Deal, he was already losing hundreds of millions of dollars and wrote a book about how you could be a good deal maker. And now we know he was losing hundreds of millions of dollars. People that were reading that book were reading the book of one of the least successful business people in all of America.
Yeah, and by the way, the president, as we predicted, has responded now this morning to the story, tweeting his response to the New York Times piece. He wrote just a moment ago, quote, "Real estate developers in the 1980s and 90s, more than 30 years ago, were entitled to massive write-offs and depreciation, there's that word, which would, if one was actively building, show losses and tax losses in almost all cases. Much was non-monetary, sometimes considered, quote, tax shelter. You would get it by building or even buying. You always wanted to show losses for tax purposes. Almost all real estate developers did, and often renegotiate with banks. It was sport," writes the president.
It was sport. It was sport, and that's why, really, that's why, I'm glad we played the piece from NBC. That's why he had to give up his 50% share in Hyatt in Midtown. That's why he had to give away Trump Airlines. That's why he had to give away his yacht. That's why this wasn't sport. This guy was struggling to do everything he could not to go bankrupt. And at the end of that piece, the bitter irony, but he got to keep his casinos, which completely wiped him out. And how many bankruptcies did he file? I mean, a ton of bankruptcies. So this guy went from the frying pan directly into the fire.
And there's one of the closing line of his tweet, which is important. So he defends everything that he did. He says the very old information put out is a highly inaccurate fake news hit job, which is exactly why I asked Suzanne Craig of the New York Times, and she was here in our last hour. And I invite, if you weren't up that early, come back and watch it online, to her explain the reporting, to explain the documents she had, how she authorized them and authenticated them, where she got them, and why they are in fact correct and not fake news. But it's funny that he goes through and explains the documents,
right,
and then at the end says, but none of that's true.
Well, exactly.
They're all fake.
Again, his own statement contradicts itself. Not a surprise. Mike?
Donald Trump is a fraud. He may not be well, but he's been a fraud all his life. And the media has enabled him. The system has enabled him. He is a product of the system. And now he is bending the system. The system isn't failing, it's accommodating. And it's accommodating what is a mass calamity. So it's important that you vote. It's important that you vote. And if you are feeling anxious or nervous or scared at the moment, I would strongly recommend that you consult. Not necessarily, well, you can consult help, but I seek some help with this. But I strongly recommend that for your anxiety and nervousness and fear, that you contact a local group, a political organization, and help them, or phone bank for them, or do something that will help alleviate your anxiety. Set up a meeting with prospective young people, because it is the young who need to vote. I don't think the Democrats have done the best job this week in the convention reaching out to them. I think they tried to a degree, but I think there was more they could have done, and they have to continue doing it. But I think that we all have to do it too. And it would be best to have young people recruit young people rather than old people talking down and lecturing young people. They're going to tune that out, I think, in many instances. So it's important to vote. It's important to do something with the anxiety and the fear that you're feeling. By all means, have those feelings. No one is saying, I'm certainly not saying you shouldn't. Because I certainly have some of those concerns and feelings myself, particularly for after the election. But I feel good about Joe Biden winning this thing. But we have to make it happen. We cannot just say that and take it for granted like 4 years ago. And I think it's very important now that if you are feeling anxious and worried and stressed, that you do try to alleviate some of that by, I think, at least trying to sign up for a political organization where you can call and where you can engage in meetings and call up people and try to register them to vote somehow. Or if you can't do that, then try to attend meetings in political organizations where you can make the phone calls and educate people. It will make you feel better. It really will, because you're contributing to enlightening people. And that's a powerful thing. It's also good for you. So also keep that in mind.
Now, the U.S. leads the world in coronavirus cases by a lot. The U.S. is just over 4% of the world's population, yet represents 31% of total cases. And the president somehow thinks that's a good thing.
When we have a lot of cases, I don't look at that as a bad thing. I look at that as, in a certain respect, as being a good thing, because it means our testing is much better. So if we were testing 1 million people instead of 14 million people, we would have far fewer cases, right? So I view it as a badge of honor. Really, it's a badge of honor. It's a great tribute to the testing and all of the work that a lot of professionals have done.
I mean, aside from the fact that most believe that this president has botched this crisis from the get-go, and this will be known in history worldwide as a human catastrophe that he could have prevented. And he's trying to deflect at all times. And Willie and Mike, he's tweeting again all sorts of crazy things. Once again, tweeting conspiracy theories about Joe, falsely accusing him of murder, talking about the death of a young staffer in his congressional office years ago. and calling him dangerous to walk the streets. And I'll just say, I'll take a point of personal privilege here. That's sick. Donald, you're a sick person. You're a sick person. To put this family through this, to put her husband through this, to do this just because you're mad at Joe because Joe got you again today, because he speaks the truth and he speaks plainly about your lack of interest and empathy in others and your lack of ability to handle this massive human catastrophe, the fact that you've made it worse and that you make it worse every day and that you won't even wear a mask to protect people from your germs. But the germs you're spreading on Twitter, first of all, Twitter, you shouldn't be allowing this, and you should be taking these tweets down, and you should be ashamed of yourself. You'll be hearing from me on this, because this is BS. But Donald, you're a sick person. You're really a cruel, sick, disgusting person. And you can keep tweeting about Joe, but you're just hurting other people. And of course, you're hurting yourself. Willie, why don't...
That was Mika Brzezinski from May of this year, May 20th, 2020. And as you heard, and I alluded to it earlier and didn't want to go into it, but, you know, she talked about Donald Trump being sick for the things that you just heard that he accused Joe Scarborough of. And of course, it's complete lies, what he was saying. This is cruelty. And this is where I have sympathy for Mika and Joe. I don't care that they're famous. I don't care that's irrelevant. It is that kind of thing that anybody, whether they're famous, whether they're you or me or someone who is private or whomever, that someone, this case, the guy in the White House, is going to say these really disgusting and untrue things, these lies, these vile lies about you, about me, about any of us, and take to a social media platform and spread that garbage to 85,000 or 85 million or whatever the hell it is he's got for followers. That's just vile. And yeah, I agree with Mika. The people at Twitter, and I think they've done a horrible job in general. They're trying to get better, but they need to get better now. Yesterday, last month, last year, last decade. And take these tweets down. Suspend this guy. That's what should be happening. So, yeah, it's reprehensible, that kind of stuff. But that's just one chapter in a continuing saga of this dysfunctional, or at least very complicated at times, relationship. I don't think it's that complicated now, judging from what you heard there from Mika Brzezinski just 3 months ago now, on May the 20th of this year, 2020. By the way, that was just 5 days before George Floyd would be murdered and brutalized in Minneapolis by police. The article, Donald Trump is not well, that's the op-ed that Mika Brzezinski and Joe Scarborough wrote, was written in the Washington Post, dated June the 30th, 2017. When I return, more audio. This time it will be Joe Scarborough speaking, in large part in connection to and with the op-ed, Donald Trump is not well. Mika Brzezinski and Joe Scarborough wrote this op-ed called Donald Trump is not well in the Washington Post, dated June the 30th, 2017. On that same day, they broke their vacation, came back to the set of Morning Joe, and they addressed some of the things that they wrote about in that story. But what's more, they get specific and they go into what I started to lay the groundwork for, this National Enquirer threat, or this threat at least by Donald Trump and people in the White House as they attacked Joe Scarborough. And I already played you the audio earlier in this episode of Mika Brzezinski responding on air to Donald Trump earlier this year about the really evil things that Donald Trump was saying on Twitter about Joe Scarborough. And I'm not going to repeat it, but you heard it. I mean, this guy is really a sick, evil guy. And he's in the White House now. And you have an opportunity, either this month, next month, October, preferably. I know some people will vote on November 3rd. But you have an opportunity to get this guy out of public life, let alone just out of the White House. This is from Morning Joe, June the 30th, 2017, just over 3 years ago now, but it feels like yesterday. Listen to this.
I want to ask you guys about something else you published in the Washington Post piece this morning. It's something, again, we've talked about in private. You've never talked about on television, but I'm already getting a lot of questions about it, so I want to give you the chance to explain. I'll just read a quote. This year, top White House staff members warned that the National Enquirer was planning to publish a negative article about us unless we begged the president to have the story spiked. We ignored their desperate pleas. What exactly happened there, to the extent you're comfortable talking about?
Well, I mean, I'm comfortable talking. I mean, I think we have to talk about it now because it explains the relationship and his really strange obsession with this show, and in particular, his really disturbing obsession with Mika. We got a call that, hey, the National Enquirer is going to run a negative story against you guys, and it was, Donald is friends with, the president is friends with the guy that runs the National Enquirer. And they said, if you call the president up and you apologize for your coverage, then he will pick up the phone and basically spike the story. I had, I will just say 3 people at the very top of the administration calling me. And the response was like, are you kidding me? I don't know what they have. Run a story? I'm not going to do it. The calls kept coming and kept coming, and they were like, call. You need to call. Please call. So, come on, Joe, just pick up the phone and call him. It's blackmail.
And let me explain what they were threatening. They were calling my children. They were calling close friends.
You're talking about the National Enquirer.
And they were pinning the story on my ex-husband, who would absolutely never do that. So I knew immediately it was a lie and that they had nothing. And these calls persisted for quite some time. And then Joe had the conversations that he had with the White House where they said, oh, this could go away.
So I just want to be very clear here.
Wow.
The National Enquirer is harassing your children, your daughters, who are teenagers.
Yeah. And it's,
and then Joe in turn is getting calls from the White House.
By the way, they're also, I was at Mika's house for a few minutes and came out, and there was a guy in a van that was staked out there watching. It was clear that he was from a tabloid, and he started asking questions. And then after all this started happening, that's when we started getting calls from the White House saying, if you call, you need to call the president, and we'll
And our
do what we can.
response, talking to my ex-husband, talking to Joe, talking to my kids, was, screw it, let them run it. Just go ahead and run it.
By the way, they ended up running something. And they interviewed a guy who said, yeah, I seen him there for about a year. He comes in, he buys about, 3 6-packs of beer a week here in my store. I've never bought a beer. You can check it out. I'll be Gary Hart here. Follow me around. I've never bought a beer in my life. From a convenience store, from a bar.
I wish it was, Joe, what you just said is forget it. I don't want to talk about tweets anymore. Right. What you just said is one of the most frightening things I've ever heard.
Well, this is what we got.
Basically, that This story is going to run unless you grovel to the president, and then the president will kill the story.
But not just the story run. We will stop we'll have National Enquirer stop harassing your children if you grovel to the president of the United States.
And what makes it even worse for them is Donald Trump called me during the campaign and bragged about his friend who ran the National Enquirer. He said, and it'd always say, have you seen the Ben Carson story? Have you seen the Ben Carson story? Have you seen that story in the Enquirer? And then he would talk about it. Did they do the JFK story too? I don't know if they did the JFK story too, but there were all these stories that were planted in the National Enquirer for people that Donald Trump wanted to attack. And then he would talk about it on the campaign trail. So when we heard, he said, oh, so we've gone from campaign mode to now trying to attack us. And of course, go ahead. We were like...
The Ted Cruz JFK story was the National Enquirer. That his father was involved somehow.
Yeah. Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to...
That was just absolutely nuts. And that sounds a lot worse than what they actually wrote. But yet it's the same darn thing. You have a psychopath in the White House, everybody. Just in case you didn't realize that already. This guy is using the news media, at least the National Enquirer, as his own personal clearinghouse of attack. And I think he's going to lose this November. And when he does, after all the unrest is over with from some of his violent supporters, what you will see is a Trump TV channel, which will rival Fox, which will attempt to eclipse Fox. And he will be peddling lies all across that channel. That's what's going to be happening. That's my prediction. There's no doubt in my mind that Mika Brzezinski and Joe Scarborough were enablers of Donald Trump into the White House in those earlier days, in 2015 and 16. Well, obviously they were earlier days, but crucial days, because, of course, 2016 was when Donald Trump ended up stealing the election with the help of Russians. And we know about that from the 966-page Republican-led Senate Intelligence Committee report, the fifth different report that they have published about the Russians interfering with the 2016 election and their relationship with Donald Trump. A very close relationship with him, the Russians had, and his campaign with each other. But this stuff here, I mean, again, as I listened to that audio just now, again, the idea of journalism being so degraded now that, quite frankly, as grotesque and as vile as this is, and I know I'm republishing it, so I'm playing a role too, which is really not something I'm proud of. But I'm doing it to make this point, is that all of this, as grotesque as it is a ratings coup in a very sick way. Nothing is private anymore. In fact, nothing, it seems, is even personal anymore. All of your laundry is exposed. And the notion that you have a so-called president in the White House doing this personally to you, let alone Joe and Mika, is the height of disturbing and most grotesque behavior. Psychopathic and injurious to the very end. And the whole thing, as grotesque as it is, sounds like a damn soap opera. Gone dreadfully, horribly wrong. But when are soap operas ever totally warm and fuzzy and neat and tidy?
Donald Trump, congratulations. How's your family holding up at this point?
Everyone's great. It was great seeing you, and you guys have been supporters, and I really appreciate it. And not necessarily supporters, but at least believers. You said there's some potential there, and the same thing with Bob. Bob has been a real professional, and whereas other people were looking and saying, well, wait a minute, he's very successful as a developer and a business guy, but he's not a politician. And Bob got an early glance, and I appreciate Bob's fair reporting in the Washington Post very much so.
Okay.
Well, I will tell you what, when you say supporter, you're talking about how actually, you're talking about Bob, Mika, myself, also helping Willie and those of us around the table. There were a handful of people who, for 6 months, have been saying what happened last night could happen. And the rest of the media world has been
But let me clarify what supporters
has been mocking and ridiculing exactly what he's done.
This is kind of important because from the get-go, I mean, I don't agree. Donald and I have not agreed on things ever since we started talking about pageants on Morning Joe. So it's not like Donald and I have the same worldview. You guys might in some ways, but we knew that he could do this from the get-go. So I think the sense is that we believed that his talents actually could follow through and translate into something while everyone else underestimated him.
Suggested that he could have a big impact on the race, was scorned by almost all media outlets who've spent the last 6 to 9 months suggesting that we were wrong about that. Now that it is happening, they're now mocking and ridiculing us because we got it right.
Well,
and
actually,
suggested that somehow we're too close to Donald Trump, when that's just a lie. The fact of the matter is, they're just angry because they have been wrong for 9 months, and we've been right.
You know, it is also, it's you know, we saw it with Joe Klein yesterday. His head was about to explode here on the set, and there are people who cannot get their heads around this. And because we've known him on previous levels professionally, we had a sense about this. And it's not just scorn we're getting. I mean, from some of our competitors, we're getting a strange microscope, as if we are incapable of asking Donald Trump tough questions.
It's
if you saw
amazing.
the town hall, you would see that we've asked him every question. We've pushed back. I don't agree with probably 4 out of 6 major things that he said. I thought they were horrible, and I have said that, and I'll say it again. And yet you have our competition holding a similar town hall and asking him if he likes pizza. Are you kidding me?
If he
and
likes
what music
pizza.
you listen to.
And last week,
I don't remember doing that.
It was the same exact thing last week with the town hall meeting that a competitor.
And then they have us doing articles. This is Trump derangement syndrome.
It is. And so a competitor of ours actually asks questions about, how did you meet your wife? What's it like being in first place? Et cetera,
how do you relax?
And so
you sleep?
So yeah, how much sleep do you get? And for some reason, there are no articles written about this. The Washington Post, actually, after our town hall meeting the other night, when I peppered him with so many questions that I was actually attacked for interrupting too much, actually said, how dare they hold a town hall meeting where they don't ask him tough questions.
So I hope the Washington Post.
It's a bunch of nonsense. And here's the great thing.
CNN does a piece on Biden.
Here is the great thing, all right? We live in a world of transcripts. Look at the transcripts. The truth is out there.
Look at ours.
And we ask tougher questions, certainly in the town hall meeting the other night than anybody else has asked him in any town hall. You can look at Anderson Cooper's last week. You can look at what happened last night.
And by the way,
let me just say, I love Anderson Cooper.
And he did a good job.
And we've been very positive about Anderson Cooper. But just because our competitors have hired media reporters who have actually planted this seed in other people's head that we're going easy on Donald Trump, that we ask tougher questions than our competitors ask, who have the media writers, and people have the audacity to ask, are we too close to Donald Trump? The answer is no, we're not.
He calls you his supporters. Then he realizes, obviously, in that clip, that he has made a big mistake. So he tries to backtrack. Well, at least you're not exactly supporters, but and he backtracks, and then Mika backtracks, then Joe backtracks, then they defend and they say, oh my goodness me, they take out all this time, oh my goodness, we don't support him, we're not supporting him, we are just right about him. Well, you actually Yeah, you're right about him that he was going to do well, and he obviously did well in the primaries that year in 2016, but you're wrong because you got him wrong and you didn't think he was going to come after you the way he did. But he did, full throttle. And having him on your show as much as you did, whether you claim that, well, other people could have had a chance to respond. Well, do you normally invite other people on? Did you invite these candidates? Now, maybe you did, I don't know. Did you invite the candidates on their own volition? I think you know that candidates are not going to come on to respond to Donald Trump. Candidates are going to come onto your air to have their own airtime in their own proactive way. They are not going to come on the air, particularly during a campaign, to respond to half an hour of Donald Trump. Why? Why wouldn't they do that? It's easy. They are not going to play Donald Trump's game. They would be absolutely playing right into his hands. So they will text Mika Brzezinski and text her their objections, their vehement objections. But the minute they pick up that phone and call into the show, they become part of Donald Trump's circus as well as the news media's. So you've got this dichotomy. On the one hand, the two of them are victimized by this brutal person who is an abuser. I mean, Donald Trump is not just a bully. He is an abuser. He's the kind of person that would commit domestic violence, and I wouldn't be shocked if he has. On the one hand, that's the relationship that Mika Brzezinski and Joe Scarborough kind of had with him, at least in the beginning. Not that he would abuse them in the beginning, but they were in league together. And I'm not saying that abused people are in league with their abuser, because that is not what I believe at all. And I've not been in a situation like that, so I am not at liberty to speak on it. I'm simply saying that there's some tangled threads in there, because they are being abused by Donald Trump now, these days. Yet, in the same breath, it was these two very individuals who helped to enable Donald Trump. And I know that they will both disagree with me. And they may say, well, this is just some no-namer. What does he know? Well, I know this. He was on your show a whole lot. And I know this, your ratings absolutely went up, which is why you welcomed him and why he called in all the time. And you never refused him, except for the one time you cut him off and went to commercial. And he said, go ahead, go to commercial. And they did it. And Joe Scarborough did it. You heard that. I'm sure you'll hear that clip, or you heard that clip already, rather. I mean, that's the time he told him, go to commercial then. And he did. Then he came back on. So you hung up on him? I mean, you didn't hang up on him, Joe. You cut to commercial, and quite frankly, you cut to commercial at Donald Trump's behest. And then you resumed the interview for another half an hour, 33, 34 more minutes. No one was getting that kind of airtime on television, Joe. Nobody was. Not in uninterrupted 34, 35 minutes, preceded by 3 minutes before that were interrupted. I have definite differences of opinion with Joe Scarborough, for sure. Disagree with him on a lot of things. Disagree with him on a lot of his tweets. But I certainly do not envy the position of someone being attacked and having his partner, Mika Brzezinski, who is, Joe Scarborough is Mika Brzezinski's husband, and Mika Brzezinski having, her kids being threatened and harassed, seriously, by Donald Trump and people at the White House or the National Enquirer. The White House are calling Joe and Mika's kids are being harassed and threatened by the National Enquirer. I mean, what kind of society do you really want to live in? And that's really what Joe Biden is talking about. And what Democrats have been talking about for 2 or 3 election cycles or 2 or 3 presidential races. What kind of society do you want? What kind of person do you want to be? What kind of person do you want to be responsible for your life? Or do you want to be lazy like Donald Trump is? While I disagree with Joe Scarborough on many things, I don't think that the guy should be threatened and harassed. And I mean, that's just ridiculous. It's just ridiculous. This clip you are about to hear is from September the 13th, 2016. You will hear from Sam Stein and Mika Brzezinski and Joe Scarborough and Mike Barnacle and Nicole Wallace. A number of subjects get brought up, including Donald Trump talking about sexual assault, talking about rape, and Mika, responding to what Trump had said, plus Hillary Clinton and Russia. Now, this, bear in mind, was just less than 2 months before the 2016 general election that was held on November the 8th, 2016.
This has been Walgreens, everyone's place for healthy and safe.
Battery 100%. Connected to Omar's iPad Air.
Just pulled down my schedule on Friday, Barack Obama. Donald Trump. I should have gotten some rest sooner. I probably would have been better off if I'd just pulled down my schedule on Friday. But like a lot of people, I just thought I could keep going forward and power through it. And obviously that didn't work out so well. Compare everything you know about me with my opponent. I think it's time he met the same level of disclosure that I have for years. You know, you've got a medical report on me that meets the same standard as Mitt Romney and Barack Obama. Donald Trump's doctor said he'd be the healthiest president in history. That's just not even serious. I've talked to my staff. We take responsibility for that. But the information is out there.
That guy was... We'll talk about that in a minute. The top brass of Clinton's campaign admit they could have been more forthcoming with information as the medical scare unfolded on Sunday. The acknowledgement came after President Obama's former chief advisor, David Axelrod, tweeted, quote, "Antibiotics can take care of pneumonia. What's the cure for an unhealthy penchant for privacy that repeatedly creates unnecessary problems?" That prompted a series of responses. First from Donald Trump's campaign manager, Kellyanne Conway, who replied, quote, "Whoa, well said." Axelrod hit back, tweeting, quote, "Transparency works both ways. Kellyanne, where are Donald Trump's tax returns, health records, secret plans?" Then from Clinton's director of communications, Jen Palmieri, quote, "We could have done better yesterday, but it's a fact that the public knows more about Hillary Rodham Clinton than any nominee in history." Adding, quote, "In contrast to HRC, Trump has been less transparent than any nominee in modern history." among other things. Offstage last night at Trump's rally, there was a tense scene harkening back to the primaries when a Trump supporter grabbed a protester by the shirt and back of his neck as security was still approaching. See, this is a little, we got to find the other video. The man balled his hand into a fist and appears to strike the protester. NBC observed a member of Trump's advance team holding the man back. The man was allowed to remain for the rest of the rally. Asheville police did not immediately return NBC's request for comment on why the man was allowed to remain inside after his actions.
We actually have a video that will show in a little bit of punching back and forth here.
And a Democratic...
Where this one guy punches two guys and then...
I think gets in a woman's face as well, shoves her. And a Democratic group is now requesting that authorities charge Trump with inciting a riot, citing these comments he made immediately after the protesters were escorted out.
Hit and escorted out.
Ask you this question. Is there any place in America more fun to be than a Trump rally, right?
So Donald Trump, Mike Barnacle, says that after one of his supporters punches a couple of different people and shoves his hand in a woman's face.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's, a side dish, all of it. The rally, what happens at the rally, the clip that we just showed. I want to know things about Donald Trump that I think that a lot of people want to know. I want him to release his tax returns.
I can tell you this, when there's violence at his rallies, he glorifies it.
He does.
Isn't that a lot of fun?
He's been doing that for 15 months.
Pretty deplorable.
Still doing it. Still doing it.
And nothing happens.
Yeah. And no, Donald Trump's not going to release his tax returns.
Ever.
Under any circumstances, because
then he ought not to be president.
He's either doing a lot.
I want to know if he's
either doing
money from Russian banks.
He's either doing a lot of business with Vladimir Putin.
Yeah.
And he is so compromised that America's national security will be compromised if he's president of the United States. That's one option. Or two, he's the biggest liar in America when it comes to his income. And what everybody has always said in New York City about his income, that he's only worth a couple $100,000 or a couple $100 million.
I give up.
We're interrogating Barnacle.
Yeah, that he's only worth a couple $100 million.
Or he didn't pay.
Or both. Yeah.
Or third option is that he didn't pay much tax.
Or guess what?
He probably gets around stuff.
Yeah.
He's always looking
for
other ways
development
to do
stuff. I mean, all the developers do that. They
putting
turn
his
their
name on
taxes.
buildings.
I think understands that. The Russian stuff, I want to find out about. Is it true or not true?
You won't. He'll never put. I don't think he'll ever put it out. I mean, this is where Hillary Clinton is absolutely correct to talk about a double standard. She will be forced because of her health issue, whatever you want to call it, to put out more health information. He went to like a CVS walking clinic and had some guy write up a post-it. I think that would be
talk about Harold Bornstein like that, okay?
Awesome.
Do not talk about
and that'll be all we get.
Who is this doctor?
Harold Bornstein is a legend.
Yep.
He's a gift to the medical community, and I will not.
Is he a real doctor? What is he?
It's unclear.
He can't be.
You know what? Is he a real doctor?
He is a doctor.
You know what? That is such a close-minded question. I mean, he's a real doctor.
An acupuncturist.
Like Dr. Nick on The Simpsons is a real doctor.
I wish I could put up a picture of him.
The gastroenterologist.
He is the second runner-up in the 2010 Willie Nelson lookalike contest.
He looks like Willie?
If we have a picture of him.
Wow.
He looks like Willie. He's from The Big Lebowski. All right, what do we have?
It's actually not funny. Like the report he put out, I think all these candidates have to release more information, but the report he put out on Trump was like almost an insult to the intelligence of voters in the way he described Trump's house. What was it like? In the history of the presidency, there will never be a more fit candidate.
I gotta say, we all have the thing we're the most concerned about. I'm the most concerned actually about his relationship. Donald Trump's relationship with Vladimir Putin. Yeah. There is something deep there. I would not be surprised if he's indebted to Vladimir Putin.
No, Joe.
I wouldn't be surprised.
I would be very worried about that if he hadn't also said, what do you think happens when you put men and women together? I mean, my God. He's creepy.
I'm saying we all have.
He's creepy.
Okay.
Like people get raped when you put men and women together. No, seriously, think about that statement, everybody. Talk to me.
It's bad.
Help me out here.
It's bad. It's back to the basket. It's just a really big
back in the basket of deplorables.
Stuff. No, it's just a big basket of.
Hayden next.
I don't know.
You're not going to.
What are you doing?
What did Sullivan ask?
Well, that was quite a conversation, wasn't it? That was from September the 13th, 2016, Morning Joe. And by the way, I forgot to mention, there was violence. Remember, people have forgotten that at Donald Trump's rallies during his campaign for the 2016 election, there were many instances of violence. And you heard there in that audio about Asheville, North Carolina, you heard the clip of him. And you had this, this man, white man, punching two men and getting in the face of a woman and shoving her. I mean, then there was, you didn't see it, obviously, but there's video of a man outside getting in a woman's face and nearly headbutting her. I mean, it's just, this is the ugliness that has happened here over these last few years. Not to mention the stuff that you heard them also talking about. That was Nicole Wallace, Joe Scarborough, Mika Brzezinski, Sam Stein, and Mike Barnacle. And when you think about it, again, this is one of the reasons I'm concerned about what happens after this election, because I really do think you're going to have violence. And it's a sad thing to say, shouldn't be saying it perhaps, but please be careful, because there are people out here in this world who are dangerously unstable. So be careful. I pray that I'm wrong about the aftermath of November of this year in the United States, but you can see the through lines about this. You can see them. And all these people who've done mass shootings, nearly all of them are, racist white men. And certainly, all but maybe one of them. I think all of them are. Maybe one of them wasn't, but practically all of them. And they're all Trump supporters, all of them. Or they had written about Trump in their manifestos. And I mean, these people are just evil, and they are racist, and they are people that should not be in society among us. And they're carrying guns around. Mass shootings. And I fear that is going to be happening, and I pray I'm wrong. But look at the tenor of violence. Look at the rallies where he's encouraging violence. Very, very dangerous. And these conspiracy groups marked as domestic terrorist groups by the FBI. We're talking about, well, what if he doesn't leave? The media is talking about that. He's called for police to bump the heads of people who they arrest against the cars. He's said, bikers there for me, and the police have got them on my... I mean, this is... if the election... If I don't win, that means it's rigged. I mean, this is a dictator talking, and he's stirring up violence amongst his supporters. These people with half a brain who will take to the streets violently. I mean, this is very serious stuff. And I think that clip from, again, just barely, less than 2 months before the 2016 election, quite a range of subjects in a 6-minute period, but definitely of interest. And by the way, Mike Barnacle, the violence is not a side dish. And yes, there are definitely double standards with Hillary Clinton as opposed to Donald Trump, who last year in November was rushed to Walter Reed for 2 days, and you haven't still heard boo about it and about what happened. Thank you for listening to this edition of The Politicrat. I'm Omar Moore.